Hi, everyone. Welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Experts. I'm Brian Nickerson, founder and CEO of MagicLinks, and today I'm joined by an amazing business leader and inspirational founder and fellow YPO member, Sam White, to discuss building inclusive brands. On the show today, we'll cover what it takes to build inclusive brands, how a company culture can match its public promise, and what leaders can do when brands face brand backlash. With that, welcome to the show, Sam.
Hey, Brian. How you doing? It's morning for you, isn't it?
It's morning, yeah, and evening for you. I think you're based in UK, correct?
I am indeed. And we are having glorious weather, which is very unusual. So I've been enjoying the sunshine.
Summertime is always wonderful. So, Sam, you're the founder and CEO of Stella Insurance, and as we kind of kick off the conversation, can you give a little bit of your background and experience and what Stella is aiming to change in the insurance industry?
Yeah, sure. So for my sins, I've been in financial services for 24 years. Started my first business from my sister's conservatory with a phone and a desk, and started working with motor insurance brokers, which, as we discussed previously, in the States you would call auto insurance brokers, just managing managing their claims and supporting their customer base, and then just grew that to working with insurance businesses. And then I actually set up my own insurance company. So I did that over 20 odd years and just experienced the fact that it is very male dominated. I think there's only 8% of the CEOs in insurance are actually female. And as a result of that, I started to notice that the environments weren't always female friendly. The product design wasn't always female centric. And eventually I got to a point where I wanted to effect a change. And so I launched Stella Insurance, and actually launched it in Australia to start with, which most people find a little bit strange, but it worked for me.
Amazing. So as we get set to dive into the conversation, I want to give just a quick overview of YPO and introduce that to the audience for those who aren't yet a member or considering becoming a member. It's a global organization of over 30,000 CEOs in, I think, 142 countries now, almost across the entire planet. And one of the benefits of YPO and being a member is the opportunity to connect and learn from inspiring business leaders like Sam. So that's kind of the grounding of the conversation. And then for those who are here live, you can ask questions in the chat. We have a moderator who will be bringing those. So as Sam and I have our conversations, we'll be able to bring in audience questions as well as time gets in. So Sam, maybe as a point of starting, your father, Tony, I think has been a big inspiration for you, and I know you speak vulnerably about him and his impact on you, and I think what you're trying to do, and wondering if you would maybe start us off and share how your dad is with you and how you lead vulnerably with that experience and with your father's upbringing.
Yes, my dad passed a couple of months ago, and he was what I would consider to be a great example of healthy masculinity. So I'm a great believer in balance in the world, and I think at the moment we are out of balance. And I'm also a total optimist, and I believe that that can change very easily. And one of the things
Mm.
with Stella that I want to do, I don't just want to empower women to have a voice at the table and be involved in financial services and involved in kind of designing the whole space. I want to encourage men to lean into their vulnerability. And my dad was incredible at that. One of my earliest memories of him, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, Brian, but the Live Aid concerts that
Mm.
were in the 80s. my parents were watching the whole thing, and at one point Bob Geldof was trying to get people to give money, and he was sort of screaming at the screen like, you know, give money now, give money now. And my dad was so moved by the whole thing. I remember just watching him sobbing, trying to phone to get through to donate this money. And he just always was really, really comfortable to show his emotions. And my personal view is I grew up to be very confident and very sure of myself. And I think it's because my dad was able, as a man, to show his emotions and his vulnerability. It actually really helped me as a woman show my strength. And I'm really passionate about men championing women as opposed to trying to rescue them, and for us to find this kind of equilibrium between us. And I think you can do a lot of that if you build the right kind of businesses.
And so, is it? I mean, I appreciate you speaking so openly about your father, especially that he's passed recently. That I you know, reading some of what you've written and how challenging Father's Day was for you resonates for me in many ways. Where I lost my mother more than 20 years ago, but Mother's Day is always a challenging day because of that. And for me, like speaking about that publicly is still challenging. Many years later. And I'm wondering how you lead very vulnerably on a topic that is new for many people, and you talk a lot about this, you know, about toxic masculinity and how you know, how we can change it. Um, are there how at Stella? How do you think about that? How do you bring that to life in the day to day and in the culture of the company?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started from the position of let's not assume anything. Like, let's actually talk to our customers who are mostly women. We do insure men as well, but it's mostly women, and it's about talking to them as opposed to talking at them. So, you know, research was a big part of us before we even put pen to paper in terms of what we were trying to do. And then we just kind of looked at, is there anything about the underwriting of the products that could be discriminatory, could have like unintended consequences? Then the product design, is that fit for purpose? Then the experience of purchasing a product and coming on board, how easy and simple can we make that? But from a deeper perspective, I believe that when you're creating a community, it's all about, like, I care about this, what do you care about? If we both care about the same things, then I think we have an opportunity to build something together. That's what community means to me. So we were really keen to show that we stood with women. When we launched, we didn't want to just say we were for women, but then have no substance behind that. And one of the areas that we were really passionate about supporting was victims of domestic abuse. And so we changed some underwriting policies that we felt would um, negatively affect women in that way. So we discovered that if somebody's vehicle was damaged by a partner, that the claim would be repudiated. So we removed that clause. But we also said every time we sell a policy, we want to give this money to Women and Girls Emergency Centre. So we gave
Mm,
$5 from every policy sold to Women and Girls Emergency Centre, because that was our way of literally putting our money where our mouth was and saying, we care about this. If you care about this as well, then we're both on the same page. But I think, to your point of being able to talk about things that make you feel uncomfortable and vulnerable, I personally hope that by being vulnerable myself, and it is sometimes uncomfortable to speak about these things that we hold so close to our hearts, I feel like as a leader, that gives others permission to do the same thing. And the thing I've found really lovely about that whole process is that I do speak publicly about some sensitive subjects and subject matters. And I nearly always watch this sort of wave, this cascade, as we do as humans, as you just did with me, where you share something and other people then feel comfortable to be able to do the same with you.
That's amazing. It's we need more leaders like that. Do you, you spoke about I think 8% of uh, CEOs or founders in the insurance industry. Some very small portion are women, and and I think what you're getting at is kind of the implicit bias of some of the policies of a kind of male-dominated industry, and therefore sort of like what comes out of that. How about from a fundraising perspective, like the data, you know, sort of globally is very little money goes to female founders. Is there anything you can share in your experience from a fundraising perspective, or as a woman CEO in a male dominated, that you've learned from and that others can learn from? Because you're
Yeah,
certainly paving a path that's an important one.
yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you don't realize you pick stuff up as you go along. You don't realize that how meaningful it is, or you've learnt this lesson and you just assume everybody else knows. But I when I started the business, I said it was my sister's conservatory with a phone and a desk, and I just started making money and then putting that money back into the business. And then at a certain point, I thought, oh, it'd be good to get a bank loan because that would support me to do more and get office and staff and I just, my bank manager just flat out refused to lend me any money at all. And I was like, but I'm making money and I'm making a profit. And it wasn't happening. And somebody said to me, well, you know, you're the wrong demographic. You're young, you're female. We joke about the north of England being slightly more discriminated against than the south of England, which you probably got the equivalent in the US of something similar. But you know, I kind of went, well, okay, I've got everything against me, but actually, that they said you should take somebody in that looks the part, and my dad agreed to come in and pretend to be part of the business and just sit there and look white and male and come to. I remember him saying to me, like, if they ask me any questions, I'm like, I've got no idea what you do, and I was it's okay, Dad. Just sit there and look like that. I promise you it'll be all right. And we ended up getting the overdraft. So that was like my early experience. But actually, I went on to grow the business, and we got up to £20 million turnover, multi-million-pound profit, and I was still hitting the same obstacles when I was trying to raise money. And I was like, this is insane. Like, what am I? What is wrong with me? Which was the perspective I took at the time, that I'm not quite making this work. And then I started researching, and penny in every pound goes to female founders, on a backdrop of actually when they get the money, them being sort of 40, 50, 60% more successful than male founders with that investment. So I said, right, okay, there's something wrong here. And again, I did a lot of research, and I came across this article on prevention and promotion questions. And it was a fabulous researcher, female researcher in the US. You can find it if you Google, but she had suffered similar situation to me. She was a researcher, so she decided to do some proper research into it. And she went to, I think, TechCrunch, and she analyzed all of these different pictures that were going on, male, female pictures, and she randomized it so that it was like a fair representation. And what she found was that when people were asked promotion questions, they were 17 times more likely to get investment. Now, a promotion question is, what other territories could you take this to? What other product lines could you move into? How could you improve your margins? Like things that encourage you to take your mind into a positive space. And a prevention question is, what happens if you lose your biggest customer? What happens if the
Mm,
interest rates go up by X amount? Like, and what she discovered is that male founders were on average asked 68% promotion questions, and female founders were asked on average 68% prevention questions, and she proved statistically that this was the case. And I thought that was fascinating because it had been my experience of feeling like I was constantly defending myself when I was going for funding, and being asked what I thought on certain occasions were ridiculous questions that,
Mm.
like it was almost like, what would you do if the entire planet was blown up? Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, seriously, like, no, I'm not doing it. And I've shared that study with a few women that I know, and they've all gone, "Oh my God, yeah, I have absolutely had that experience." And I just kind of hope that any investors, that if there are any investors listening to this, just check yourself. Are you asking prevention or promotion questions? And have you got a man or a woman in front of you?
That's amazing. I think of planetary insurance as maybe the next frontier. If
Yeah.
it, and is that's both from is that from both an investor and a sort of public reporting perspective, or that what your those questions are what an entrepreneur fields from investors?
Yeah, that was so, and it didn't matter whether the investors were male or female, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
the women that had got into the investment space had got caught in the same dynamic. It was just an inherent different way of approaching male founders to female founders. Now, the good news was that they could flip it. So if the founder turned a prevention question into a promotion question, then they could still be successful. It involves being sort of deliberately obtuse with people and ignoring the question and giving the answer that you would actually like to give.
Well, we get in the U.S. we get a lot of that in the political spectrum. If a question is asked, and a totally different one is answered. So I think people might be used to that more than we think. But that's I mean, my experience as an entrepreneur, um, obviously very different as a white male. In terms of the questions that I get, I've probably been more on the easier side, I guess, of that. Although raising capital is I have not experienced as being easy. But the other thing that I notice is there's very few female investors in the room that you're pitching to, and that's another kind of area that certainly needs a lot of growth and development. So if we kind of broaden a bit of the conversation, I'm wondering your thoughts on how brands can be inclusive and really match externally or match internally, maybe what they're saying externally from a marketing perspective. Obviously, the Anheuser-Busch example recently is one that's been in the news, and I know as we were chatting about that, you have a maybe different perspective on it that could be helpful for people to think more deeply about these subjects. What are some of your thoughts on the recent moves by Anheuser-Busch to uh, connect with the transgender community and where that went wrong?
Yeah, so I think the first question you have to ask, and this may be slightly controversial, but are you actually wanting to be inclusive? So there are certain products that are very specifically targeted to a specific segment. So if you're selling tools to a tradesman, for instance, that's doing a very specific job, then that's your target market and that's who you're focused on. There may be no specific requirement for you in your marketing to be inclusive because you will be spending a lot of marketing dollars pitching your product to the wrong demographic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in that particular set of circumstance, I think the problem that you had is that if you are setting out with your brand values to care about specific things, whether that be inclusivity or in our case, female empowerment and female protection, you have to sit down at the very start and establish what your values are and measure yourself against those values. And I think the challenge is if a brand attempts to do something from a marketing perspective that doesn't match their core values, then they're going to have a problem. And worse still, I think in that set of circumstance, the challenge they had is that their customer base was also completely at odds with the messaging that they um, were putting out. So you just end up kind of in an awful situation where you are offending everybody. Like your customers aren't happy, the community that you're supposed to be trying to stand with aren't happy, and then I think when you get challenged, it's very hard for you to be in a defensible position because you weren't coming from a place of authenticity to start with. For me, authenticity is probably more important than inclusivity in that regard.
Hmm. And for you, who are there shining examples of brands that you would say that um, are authentic both in who they are as a brand and their values and their marketing message? Is there any that you would
I was
maybe
trying to
highlight for the audience?
I was trying to think of one in the States because I know that a lot of the viewers are probably that side of the pond, and my sort of references are probably UK based. So I'd like your impression of that as well.
Hmm.
But there was a company called the Body Shop in the UK that was a female founder that ran a series of beauty stores and creams and moisturizers, etc. And she was very much into sustainability and sourcing the products correctly. And she uh, as far as I could see, always lived her brand values and her approach. And I think it kind of, as I said before, it doesn't matter what that thing is. We shouldn't all be trying to be the same thing, but we should be
Hmm.
honest about what we are and live true to that value. So my passion is more people centric than environmental. For instance, like we should all try and be the best versions of ourselves that we can. And in business, I think it's important to try and have a kind of wide brush of doing the right thing. But you will have kind of people that will over index more and businesses that will over index in certain segments. Again, it's about defining very clearly at the start what are your values and metrics and making sure that you're measuring yourself against them.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think for me in the states, probably the company that I get a lot of inspiration from is Cotopaxi, and the founder of Cotopaxi is a fellow YPO member, Davis Smith. And one of the things that they have done is really focused on first generation immigrants to the United States, and providing jobs for them and a product that like the authentic expression of who they are and the change that they want to make in the world is also present very much in the product and in the communities that they support. I know I took inspiration from this, and maybe this is why we're connected on this call. But Davis asked a question earlier this year that was sort of like, what how does the external match the internal? And so the question in regards to female leadership was, of the top 10 people in the company, how many of them, or top 10 highest paid people in the company, how many of them are women? How many of your board members, what percentage of your board is female? And what percentage is your overall company? Obviously, this is just one dimension of diversity, but it was inspiring for me to read, and then also to look internally, and it's something we pride ourselves at MagicLinks. And so, at least for us, 6 out of 10 of our top 6 of the 10 top highest paid people in the company are women. 40% of our board are women, and 65% of our team is female. And so that I guess underlines my support or at least like how I'm trying to show up as a leader, right, as a white male, and also in terms of not just putting out there that this is important, but like what's actually happening. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect that brands can
Absolutely.
see.
And I've seen that quite a lot. I was asked to judge. Woman in Insurance Awards a few years ago, and we were sat around the table, and they're looking at all these different businesses, and they everyone else had kind of agreed on this one particular firm, which I won't name and shame, but I just said, can we just stop and Google the gender pay gap at this firm? Because if we're going to give them this award, like that should be like balance, right? And it was a terrible gender pay gap, and it just shows that you have to look at that kind of metric. And I think it's incredible that you offered that balance in your organization. But I also think it's probably fantastic for business, right? We talked about this before. The world needs balance, and we all thrive. Like, my best buddies are male, and they have a completely different perspective on the world, but we're all very respectful of each other, and I think that's how you have the really good conversations and you get to a better place with each other.
I love that. I love that. I'm seeing a question come in from the audience that I think kind of hits at where our conversation is now. And is there ways that you might share about how a brand can think about elevating their own inclusivity? So if they're not hitting those metrics, right? If there is that pay gap, if there are places that I mean, I think it first starts with the belief that this is important. I think hopefully people are on here already believe that way, and if they don't, I think Sam and I are here to tell you you should.
Yeah. Okay.
But what are ways that a brand can elevate their exclusivity?
Yeah, so
Or
I
sorry, not
think
exclusivity, inclusivity. I'm sorry.
inclusivity, look, I think sometimes these things get overcomplicated and you do need to simplify them. So setting yourself some high level simple targets to start with. So your gender pay gap, your percentage of people in senior leadership roles that have diverse ethnicity or gender balance, these are simple things that you can address quite easily. But I think the cultural piece about having a open conversation, and also a very public conversation. I'm happy to kind of publicly go out and talk about what I stand for, because I think that encourages other people in my organization to feel equally comfortable. I happen to be gay. I'm very comfortable talking about that because, again, I think it gives other people permission to be themselves and not feel that they have to hide part of their personalities. And if you have diversity in your business, then inspire those leaders to also be visible, so that you can kind of encourage the people to see themselves in your company.
Interesting. Yeah, that I think that's fascinating. I'm seeing this is great. We're getting a lot of questions from the chat, so I think I'm going to go to a couple more of these. How about this is an interesting one. How do you determine what causes to support as a business? Does Stella support causes? Are there I know I think you shared before the show about every time insurance is purchased, you donate to a cause. But can you talk about that? How you make those decisions, and how that helps building your brand?
Yeah, I mean, that's really easy for us because we know what we stand for. We're about empowering and supporting and uplifting women. And one of the causes that, therefore, is very close to our hearts is supporting victims of domestic abuse, because we feel that is probably the most vulnerable component of the female community. And so it was really easy to say, we want to support Women and Girls Emergency Centre, and so every time we sell a policy, we're going to put that money in. But I think you can support in more ways than just financially. We've partnered with a number of female-centric organisations. So in Australia, there's a female entrepreneurs group called We Are One Roof. The team helped them run a conference in Sydney and bring everybody together. We have a lot of media inventory because of some deals that we did when we launched the business, and we share that inventory with partners of ours. So Her Heart is a female um, heart health foundation, and we share their messagings because we think that communication and amplification is also important, not just financial. So I think it comes back to, again, knowing what your values are and always measuring yourself against that stick in terms of your internal culture, the companies that you choose to shout about and support and financially support. And as long as those things come together, that's where your authenticity comes from. And that's where people, I think, can get quite comfortable with you as a brand.
That's amazing. Um, there are a way that we work on that is a safe place for youth is a homeless organization in Venice that we work with, and that's a place where in terms of kind of the question is around like how do you determine and how does that support the business. And for us, homelessness is a big issue in the United States and definitely in Southern California. And we felt like the place where we could have the most impact is in the youth community in particular. And Venice Beach is a place where homelessness is a big challenge in the Los Angeles County. I know this is across the pond from you, but kind of having that connection to the community and to what we see and what's around us every day, I know is an important part of kind of how uh, the team at MagicLinks has thought about that.
I lived in California for a couple of years, and I came back recently, and I was devastated and shocked at how bad the homeless situation has become there. So I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I totally agree that um, the younger you can start supporting these individuals, the more chance you've got of changing their life. And um, it is a really complex problem, and it's one that we seem to be struggling to solve worldwide. Like
Yeah,
we have similar problems in the UK, but I think the thing that I noticed when I was in California, we do have a form of obviously we've got the National Health Service, and we have a form of social care. So the thing that struck me was how many people with quite obvious mental health issues were in the homeless community in California, because obviously there isn't that safety net for them.
it's a huge issue. Um, so I'm getting a couple more questions here. One was coming my way, so I'll answer that and then see, Sam, if I can kick it to you too. But there's a question of how we convince clients of the importance of inclusion. And so maybe I'll walk through an example of something we do, and Sam, curious, how this would impact you as well. Um, for us, an area that's very important in social media on inclusion is casting diverse influencers to partner with brands. And so as the um, sort of media message and portrayal. And I think a lot of change has really happened over the last couple of years. But one of the things we did is we actually instituted a minimum requirement for non-white influencers in our brand campaigns. And what we were surprised by is that our brand partners 100% adopted that policy. And in some ways, we thought we might lose business, but still felt like that was the right thing to do and the important thing to do. And what we found is that brands actually were looking for ways um, to connect with broader audiences, and to have a more diverse representation of people using their products in the fashion and retail space in particular. And so that's something that actually gave me a lot of joy and hope as you make sort of a business decision that you think might have negative financial outcomes, and then actually realizes you're solving a problem that brands uh, need help solving. So for us, I know that was kind of specific, or that was a question that came from the audience specific to me, but wanted to make sure I had a chance to cover that. and one, Sam, that's coming your way. And we've talked about this a little bit in the pre-show, but kind of cancel culture and fear of retaliation. Um, how can leaders overcome the question here is how can leaders overcome the fear of speaking up on difficult conversations? Um, any thoughts that you have on that? And I know we talked as well of like if you make a mistake, like what do you do?
Yeah, so I don't have a fear of cancel culture. People talk about it a lot. Um, I think that what happens is there is like this wave that happens where people get this kind of righteous indignation about some kind of issue. And for me, social media is, this amplification of people dynamics. And I see in
Mm,
groups of friends, and bear with me here, but like I am always about healthy communication. And I think that doesn't matter whether it's me and you having this conversation on this chat or it's social media, like one to one dynamic. There are respectful ways that we can both have completely different views and still engage with each other. And I have to believe that that is what we are all striving for on at some level. And some of us may be more gifted at communication than others, but we should always be striving for open and honest and transparent communication. So if you end up in conflict with somebody, you have to try and engage that humanity from them. And I've got groups of friends where they have these sort of um, they're too frightened to have a conversation directly with each other, and so you have these very unhealthy dynamics of, where people get into sidebar conversations of so and so
mhm,
did that and that really upset me, and it never ends well. It's never a positive experience. The only way you can ever resolve anything is by having a one-on-one conversation. But also, as adults, we need to accept that we won't always agree. I've had conversations with people who find everything about the way that I choose to live my life as offensive. And I've actually still managed to have a conversation, an adult conversation. I might not agree with them, but because we've
mm,
both had the conversation in a respectful way, I've learned something about their perspective, and hopefully they've learned something about mine. And like that for me is growth. That's where you've got to get to. And
mm,
I understand that people are concerned about cancel culture, but I think that you have to just push through that, because otherwise we everybody ends up in this kind of completely polarized perspective, and that is not good for any of us. So I for one am a big advocate for getting people in a room that don't, that don't agree with each other on lots of different issues, but are grown up and adult enough to be able to have a sensible conversation.
that's beautiful. And we talked, I guess, building on that, we talked a bit about kind of your view of someone who's done that really well in the public eye. I think you mentioned Robert Downey Jr. Maybe just to help illustrate the point that you're making, can you share a little bit about what you think he did well that others could learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about, can you make a mistake and still be forgiven? And I think forgiveness is, absolutely that one of the greatest human gifts that we have. You could probably get into a separate debate about what is unforgivable, and where can't people kind of move forward.
Mm,
But I think when people make mistakes, the important thing is to own that mistake. We're all human. We all mess up. We all say the wrong things. Like there's none of us that are this perfect version of humanity that rocks up and always, takes everybody's feelings into consideration and doesn't do anything that's wrong. I'm certainly not that person. So if people are expecting that from me, then I like we're in a shaky ground. But what I loved about
I think
Robert Downey.
we're- just on that point, I think Willie Nelson has a great song. I just saw his 90th birthday concert, and he has a great song that's, I think, called "I'm Perfect," that just plays on that. But it's not right. But continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but we've all met those people, right? And sometimes with the best intentions, and sometimes the most politically correct individuals can also be the most intolerant and the most damaging to other human beings. But with Robert Downey Jr., I saw somebody who completely hand grenaded his own life. Did all sorts of stuff that was kind of wild and out of control, and then obviously recognized that that was not who he wanted to be, and was prepared to make a change to rectify it and get to a completely different space. And I have so much respect for that, because it's not easy being human at the best of times, but when you've completely you know gone down a certain path that's the wrong path, and it's kind of ended in that situation, to pull it around, I've got lots and lots of respect for.
Yeah. Um, and I'm reflecting on that. Do you think there are brands, like if a brand makes a mistake, are there brands that you can think of that have done a good job of recovering from a mistake, of entering into a challenging conversation or trying to be inclusive and getting something wrong and being able to come back?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before, didn't we? And I think you referenced Nike as a potential, where they, were challenged on some of their practices and made some changes, and that was positively received. Um, I think brands are being made to be much more accountable for the choices that they make and the actions that they take. I think it's incredibly difficult when we operate in a world where whatever we like to think in a business sense, the metrics that are applied always seem to come down to the same KPIs. And I think until we change the metrics and the KPIs that we judge businesses by, it makes it
Mhm.
incredibly difficult for them to fully embrace the behaviors that I think as a society we want to see from those businesses.
That's really in perspective. Um, are there another question coming in from the audience? Are there any common mistakes you see companies making when trying to create an inclusive brand?
Yeah, I think just what we were talking about before, it's that lack of authenticity.
Yeah.
People, grabbing a cause that maybe isn't their cause, that they think is cool or trendy, or, and it doesn't reflect the customer base. It doesn't reflect the brand values in the way that they operate. I think you have to take a really good long look at yourself at the start, and say, where am I at today? And what can I do that is meaningful for me, but representative of um, where I am on my journey to that kind of
Mhm.
level of inclusivity, or you know, like yourself, your business is obviously ticks a lot of boxes because you're B Corp certified, but you probably have started from a very good foundational base. Whereas if you haven't got such good foundations, then maybe a smaller gesture would make more sense.
Yeah. And I mean, a way that I think about that is like you're sort of never done. like we're always on the journey, and so it's like I think the moment you think that you're done with the journey of inclusivity is when you actually are probably stop being as inclusive, or stop learning. So we try to take that learning approach to it.
I think that's fantastic, and same as being human and trying to grow and be the best version of yourself, isn't it? I've always said
Yeah.
that if I've learned everything, I might as well be dead, because then there's no point.
Right. Sam, you shared a little bit about a slogan that Stella Insurance uses, or that you coined, and that brings a lot of play into a place. Are you comfortable sharing that live?
I am. Well, the campaign's out, so I guess I am comfortable. I'd have to be. Yeah, we were just curious about the use of language and how that impacts people, and the things that we don't even think about, that maybe are slightly more biased in one way or the other. And one of my favorite expressions growing up was, that took balls. That's ballsy, and we use it all the time in the vernacular. But of course, not everybody has balls, and so our new advertising campaign was "It takes boobs." And the reason that we use that, aside from the cheeky humor that we've got with it, but is just to get people to recognize that the language that they use does have a gender bias to it, and
Mhm.
actually courageous acts are not gender specific. And so we kind of use that to just make an impact and put it forward. But it's been unbelievably popular, and I found that even the men in our organization now check themselves. They'll go, wow, that was ballsy, sorry, booby. And we have this you know, we have this whole kind of banter back and forth, which yeah, I really enjoyed.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think that the the importance of language and kind of in storytelling. There's so much to how language can shape stories and feelings and opinions, and the that focus I just absolutely love. And then bringing a sense of humor to a place where people might have to sort of see their biases or see implicit biases, I think is just such a wonderful tool.
Yeah, no, I think you can move people a lot further with humanity and humor than you can by judgment and accusations.
Yeah. Well, Sam, as we kind of come to a close, I'm wondering, is there something you might offer to the audience that would, like, if there's something they can go do tomorrow to make their brand more inclusive, to change opinions, to build their business in a more inclusive way? Is there any kind of single action or overarching thing you would give that would be a takeaway that someone can go put to work right away?
I mean, I think the expression that I found really helpful for me, and I try and use wherever possible. I read somewhere that we are all heroes in our own stories. So even the worst people in humanity will have painted a dialogue of themselves as the hero, because that's what we're designed to do. That's how we protect
Mhm.
ourselves from emotional harm. And so it occurred to me that if I am the hero in my own story and I'm in conflict with somebody, I must be the villain in theirs. And when I'm in a situation, I try and reflect upon that and say, how am I the villain in this situation? And how is the other person the hero? And it just helps me to gain a sense of perspective and look at things in a slightly different way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think putting oneself in others' shoes is incredibly powerful, and we need more people like you in the world doing that and leading the way. Um, well, Sam, thank you so much for this conversation. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on is just YPO is a incredible community, and one that gives the opportunity for these types of conversations and to bring forth the stories of entrepreneurs like yourself. So I know it's been a big part of my entrepreneurial journey, and one that I think a lot of people can learn from. And I appreciate the conversation that we've had here. As we bring the episode to an end, would love to invite people, if you enjoyed this conversation, please like it, share it on social media, share with your friends, and let folks know about this important topic and conversation. And with that, would like to bring it to a close. This has been the latest, I guess, episode of YPO Presents, Ask the Experts. And Sam, grateful for your sharing and contributions today.
It was so absolutely lovely to meet you and chat with you. And I'm very grateful to YPO to bring this together so we could have this experience.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much.